Hence, where we're going this morning, which is Luke chapter 5, verses 33 to 39. And Jesus came to the disciples and he was teaching about different matters, and he was doing it around a table of tax collectors and sinners, and they were having a right old banquet, and that didn't go down well with the religious establishment and those who perhaps sided with John the Baptist of slightly more austere ways of being. And this is what Jesus had to say. They said to him, "John's disciples often fast and pray, and so did the disciples of the Pharisees. But yours go on eating and drinking." Jesus answered, "Can you make the guests of the bridegroom fast while he is with them? But the time will come when the bridegroom will be taken from them. In those days they will fast." He told them this parable. "No one tears a patch from a new garment and sews it on an old one. If he does, he will have torn the new garment, and the patch from the new one will not match the old. And no one pours new wine into old wineskins. If he does, the new wine will burst the skins. The wine will run out and the wineskins will be ruined. No, new wine must be poured into new wineskins. And no one, after drinking old wine, wants the new, for he says the old is better." Now, at first glance, it's a bit of an odd parable to sort of place in that context. So I just want us to draw this, and I won't be relating it to that context specifically, but I want to draw out the actual meanings of Jesus that were being applied in that context. He was saying, you can't travel down two avenues and try and, if you like, serve two agendas or work in two different ways. Just like a garment. Now, I actually had this parable, before I planned to say this, I had this parable shown to me by my mother-in-law. She came to show my daughter how to do some stitching. I said, "Oh, you can't have that piece of garment that way round. You need to sew it that way round." And turned it by 90 degrees. I was like, why on earth not? It's the same material. Looks the same to me in either orientation. She said, "No, because if you get the warp with the weft going the wrong way, when it goes in the dryer, it will shrink, and one will pull that way and the other one will pull that way, and it'll ruin it." It's the same with sewing different bits that have been washed and bits that haven't, old and new. But I'm going to focus on the wine skin. Now, unfortunately, we get ours in screw-top bottles now. Do you remember that my dad used to love the days of the box with the magic sort of button? They used to just go on forever. He just said it's magic. And he's not a big drinker, so I guess it lasted for months. But obviously, it's not something that you did back then. You did not put new, still fermenting wine in an old wineskin, because it would split. It would all be ruined, the old wineskin and the new wine. Now, here's some observations that go with that. The old wineskin is no longer flexible. That's the problem. The problem's not with the new wine, the problem is with the old wineskin is no longer flexible. It gets old and dry and cracked. Second thing, the two are incompatible. Third thing, there's a resistance to the new. The old wine is better. When was the last time you went out and bought a nice French Bordeaux at 30 quid a bottle? Don't know about you, but I remember in the 70s, when Monty Python used to take the mickey out of, Australian wine. Well, I don't buy anything else these days. It's actually quite good stuff. Give it a bit of time, it will come round. So, it's about a change. And Jesus is no longer going to operate in the Old Testament mindset of which John the Baptist was the last. Yes, there will be prayer and fasting, but he's doing a new thing. So you better get on his bandwagon, because that's what's happening. It was the same for the disciples, working it all out between Old Testament and New Testament. It was the same when we went to Isaiah 61, and when we think about Nehemiah and the Old Temple and the New Temple. You remember that the people who remembered the Old Temple, they were weeping. Those who were on the beginning of the New Temple didn't know any better, and they were rejoicing. Which one did Jesus visit? The New Temple. It's the same for us, thinking back to the good old days of pre-COVID, the old normal. But we ain't going back to those. So what's the new normal? What's God doing now that we need to get amongst? And that's what I want to talk to you about now. So, as someone who sort of looks into the future, someone who looks around at what God is doing and asks God to reveal, I see two main things. One, about when we are gathered as a church, and one as where we're scattered. What I see is when we have gathered, is that God has done an amazing work with Network Church Sheffield, and many of you have been involved in this, with food banks, with debt advice, with parenting courses, and outreach to the poor. I don't know about you, but I look at the news. We've got a cost of living crisis. And where I've seen the most growth, the new stuff, people coming to faith, it's been through the ministry of Restore, that we call it. I've seen great growth. And with Sam Evans, our CEO of NCS, he has had unprecedented opportunity to upskill himself in the area of buildings and being to see a way to unlock doors for buildings and finance within our city in order to do just that, Restore Ministries and also Forge Youth Work. So here's my first pithy statement. I heard a year and a half ago when we were listening to the Lord the phrase persistent pilgrims. I feel that the Lord will move us to access a building, perhaps, and I'm talking, that I'm putting it out there into an area of Highfield, maybe Broadfield, to do work of Restore Ministries and Forge Youth. To the least lost, it looks like a debt advice centre, it looks like a food bank, it looks like a youth project. How are we going to do that? How are we going to pay for that? How are we going to resource that? How are we going to get a building? Lord only knows. But that's what I sense on, so I'm just putting it out there. But the main nub of what I want to speak to you about today is actually about the other element, which is where we scattered. And I use the term scattered servants. Now, scattered servants is about us doing what I've been talking to you about the last 3 weeks. We talked about the model of Jesus. The model of Jesus, and the only way on which I see God unleashing his power and authority upon the earth, was in a present and proclaiming way. Word and deed, being visible and accessible in the place that you are planted. Okay? So we are all that. He didn't just stop at Jesus, he said all of us as well. His entire church distributed around the whole earth. That is how we're going to reach every tribe and tongue, every nation. So that is his model. The message that we discussed last time is simple. It's good news to the poor. And we unpacked Isaiah 61, didn't we? And it's a message of hope. He renews, he rebuilds, he everything is He goes back to Eden. He takes us back to Eden by bringing it back through us. And we are the medium of that message, so we have to live lives that actually bear that out. I think one of the words that somebody mentioned last week was that we want to be real and we want to be authentic. That is a good expression of that. So what I want to talk to you this morning about is the mould. Now thank you, Martin, for correcting my spelling. I think last time I went with M-O-L-D. That of course is, you know, some kind of
American.
Yeah. Oh well, it just it got me thinking of dark, dank places, but not that kind of mould. The mould of Jesus is this new body that he inhabits. No longer a building, a temple, a structure, a religious spirit, but a band of brothers and sisters who are set free by Jesus to go wherever and wherever he sends them. Now that sounds pretty flexible to me. It sounds like whole life. It's bringing healing, but it comes at a cost. It comes with a nervousness. We need to hold the hand of Jesus. And when I look at where there has been life and growth in the church across the world, and increasingly in the West, it is through something called a disciple-making movement. Now, how did they get that? How did they get that term? Where did it come from? Well, I'd like to suggest it came from Jesus, okay, who started the whole thing rolling. And the way he did it is he started off with people who had a part to play and a plan, and he gave them a picture. His picture was the kingdom of God. I want to use a picture this morning that I think well describes where we're going as a church. And I'd like to ask Martin if he could just play the clip now. So this clip is from a film you might have heard of called Dunkirk, and I think it well describes what God wants us to pull off.
What do you see?
great clip, isn't it? I don't know whether you've seen that film. Twice I've seen it, both times I get to that moment. Maybe it's Nimrod, Elgar in the background, or maybe it's just that God thing about that picture, but I just blow my eyes out. Because it's that fella at the helm there, and look, there's a fisherman up on the screen. These are ordinary people, ordinary folk who risk their lives to go in their little ships to rescue those people who were stranded, who needed rescuing. And the reason those little ships had to go is because the big ships, which had been useful and successful and mighty in the past, could not get where the little ships could get. And what I love about it is there were some big ships that I think the numbers are something like 4-to-1 ratio of little ships to big ships that did that evacuation. But you've got all the guys, all the sailors that have been rescued on the bigger ships, clapping and cheering on the little ships. Now, I remember sketching out that exact picture in about 2003, when the church at the time that I was in at St Thomas was meeting in the Roxy, and they were training up sort of the young adult leaders, and I sort of sat at the back and I did this little sketch, and I sketched a big juggernaut or a big oil tanker, and I would put on HMS Roxy, and then I drew myself in a little sort of motorboat or lifeboat next to it, and I wondered what that was all about. And I just sensed God saying that you might think you're on the fringes, but you're in the centre of what God is doing. In that you can get to places where that tanker cannot get. And I sense, with King Centre, you've been a big church in the past, not just in terms of influence, but in terms of size. But actually, what is called is for each and every one of us to get into the individual lives of people, into the smaller spaces. And what we've got to recover is this disciple-making movement once again. And it starts small. I think it starts with 2 and 3, all the way through Scripture, when Jesus is talking to disciples over and over again, when he's talking about whenever 2 or 3. If you're doing accountability, it's 2 or 3. If you're doing admonishment, it's 2 or 3. If you're doing prayer and accountability, it's 2 or 3. So we need to start small. And then when he starts to get training deeply with a few, it talks about the 12. And only after that does it come to start looking like a congregation of 72. So we've lost, I think, the ability to make disciples in the small. Now, we've recovered some of those skills, I think. We've got something like a huddle, which commonly is 6 to 8 people, where we're intensively training people for leadership. But not all of us do that. Not all of us would feel equipped to do that. But I think all of us can be involved in making disciples 1 to 1, 2 to 3. And we've got to relearn that, because the church as a whole does not know that. I'll give you an example. I spoke to somebody recently this week, and they've been a Christian all their life, been to church every week, on the face of it, a good Christian citizen. So I haven't been to church for 3 years. I said, all right. He said, yeah, well, partly COVID. He said, but I still tithe. I still give all my, I still support the organisation. How much is that missing the point? Because the purpose, which Jeremy brought us right at the beginning, is to go and make disciples of all nations. How is giving a monthly tithe in and of itself going to make disciples? Because he needed to be part of the process. So we need a plan, don't we? And my plan is this, and I can see the future, but all we need to know is the next step. And I think the next step is that we need to relearn how to make disciples, and we need to relearn how to multiply disciples that make disciples. Now, first of all, you have to make disciples. That's the first step. You've got to learn that. Then you've got to learn how to make disciples that make disciples. And I think that involves time. I think it involves all our life. And I do think it means that we need to change. So, I don't think we'll always be meeting like this, with one person doing all the work and a load of people listening. We need to do more small group work, small group time, where we're deeply wrestling with this and equipping one another. I also think that we don't need to continue with missional communities as they have been continuing. I think if we're honest, many of our missional community members would say it's not working in the way that it should work. So I asked somebody this week, I said, who are you relating to? Who are you being intimate with? Who's supporting you? And they were clear that it was this person or that person, or it was that couple. I said, are they in your missional community? No. Missional community should be a community on mission that looks like Band of Brothers that have got your back in every circumstance, situation. So I'm going to suggest that in the next 2 or 3 months we have an opportunity just to let things lie fallow and to think, okay, do I have vision to start something small that is disciple making? Some people have already been having a go at this. For example, Ange doing craft and kindness, Kay with different ways of doing King's Kids. Bev has just let me know recently that she just meets with 2 or 3 in her house and is discipling intensively with a few. It starts to look a bit different. Now, you might think, okay, well, where does that leave my missional community? Well, we'll work it out. We're going to have a period of reconnecting, a bit like a valley of dry bones that starts to find its sinew and its joints and its ligaments and its skin again. So it becomes a working body.